Welcome to Drawing and Sketching Basics. In your reading, you've already gone through these particular pages. On page 11, they discuss line types. And page 12, drawing techniques. And then there is an example on page 13 where some of these line techniques are actually utilized within a fairly quick, typical sketch. So what we're going to do in this lecture or this demonstration, is to practice some of those those line types. And this is arranged in the same order as they are in the reading. And so in the first square, we have the soft line. With spaces and dots and corners. So let's practice some of these line types. So first, we're going to try the soft line. Now, anytime that we are sketching, I usually will have two pencils because they tend to wear down fairly quickly and you don't want to continually sharpen them. The other side of that is that we don't typically sketch with a fine, tight point pencil. What we're wanting to do is either have a pencil line that is rounded, like this, or we want a chisel point. So we want a flattened edge on our pencil. So these are the two basic kinds of edges that we want on our pencil. So in order to do that, we always want a little scratchy sheet of paper. In this case, you have one next to your worksheet. Just go ahead and scribble back and forth until you get a very nice flat edge. So sometimes some of you will not want to do that very hard, but sometimes you have to push a little bit hard. And that will give us our chisel point. To get a rounded point, it's similar. We just have to round all the way around. So we are actually rotating our pencil until we get a rounded point, and that will give us a much softer kind of line to draw with. So in this case, that's what this is, and this is our chisel point. So with your chisel point or your rounded point, I want you to practice some of these soft lines. So inside of this box, we're just going to do some soft lines. And you can see, do you see how the edges of that line are a little bit softer, a little bit, they're not quite as defined. If we turn our pencil to the sharp point of the chisel point, we get a very straight, even-edged line. We want these soft lines to sketch with. So draw out a few more of those. All right, now this line is what we're going to do pressure and then let up the pressure and then add the pressure. So we get a little heavier line when we push fairly hard, then we're just going to ease up a little bit and then press hard. So we're going to press, ease up, and press, all in the same stroke. You don't want, this one's not good. So you don't want like a hard line and then a little teeny line and then a hard line. This is not a good line. We want it to be continuous and flowing. So pressure, up, pressure. Pressure, up, pressure. All right. In this line, we have two fuzzy lines with a space in between. So we're going to do fuzzy line, space, fuzzy line. Fuzzy line, space, fuzzy line. Fuzzy, space, space, fuzzy. And a lot of times we'll use this particular line to accentuate when something kind of is continuing, but we don't want that solid line sitting in there. All right, this is similar to this, except we have a fuzzy line, and then we have a little dash at the end, or a little dash and a fuzzy line, a little dash and a fuzzy line. And sometimes those dashes are nothing more than a small dot. depending on what we're drawing. And many times we'll use this particular technique when we're trying to draw, when we want something to appear to continue to go further on, but we're coming to the edge of our paper, or it's gone beyond the areas that we want that to happen with. The next line is anytime we do crossing of two corners, whether it's an oblique angle or an obtuse angle or 90 degrees, we always overlap. So we have a fuzzy line and a fuzzy line. And the key is to get this overlap to be very, very consistent. So these are just fuzzy lines, and they can happen on a bottom or they can happen on a top, but we want to work on getting this consistent overlap. This line is what we call a variegated line. So it's very much similar to this one that's right across from it, except that we will add pressure and lighten pressure as we kind of go. So we're going to push the line, let light, add a little darkness. Again, maybe start out light, a little pressure and up and a little more pressure. Pressure, let up and a little more pressure. Pressure up, pressure up. Very uneven, kind of undulating or variegated. And those can get nice and thin or thick. This is what we call wormies, the next one down. And wormies, and I'm going to draw these a little bigger so that you can see it, are variegated lines, but in small segments. And they kind of wrap on one another. They're not arches, but you're going to want to turn your pencil, and they kind of collapse on one another. They don't overlap, but we end up with this texture that is overall, and we'll explore some of the areas that we do this little textural spot. Sometimes we draw out the texture a little bit where we're doing like the edge of a bush or a tree foliage area, and we do these in small little segments, not arches, but small little segments. All right. And then the last one is what we call the daisy loop. And the daisy loop can be tight like this, or it can be stretched out a little bit. Again, these are foliage lines when we draw those. The way we do this one is we imagine a point, and then we try to bring all of our lines into that particular point. It can also go down below, but we do this imaginary line where it's going. Now, sometimes when we want a more organic kind of hedge or bush, we'll do this, but we'll stretch it out. So we'll do the same kind of thing, but we're going to stretch it out a bit. And see how it kind of always comes back to a particular point? And a lot of times we use that for hedges. So those are your basic line types as they're discussed on page 11. The next section that we look at is drawing techniques, and that's this section right in through here. So all of this is freehand. We don't use any kind of straight edge or anything else. So the first box that we have here is what we call a freehand box. And so we're doing this all with freehand fuzzy lines, but notice how there's an overlap at all the corners. That's where this comes into play. So let's go ahead and try one of those, and this is with fuzzy lines. And remember, you want to overlap those corners. And just practice that overlap and do 2 or 3. You want to see that one got a little long. As you do more of these, it'll get easier and easier and easier to do. So try one more of those. And then these cubes, by the way, are what we call axonometric cubes, which means that they are the lines. This line is parallel to this line's parallel to this line, and this line. They're not a vanishing point. They're not a true perspective square. All right, the next one down is what we call guidelines. And guidelines are when we use very softly, we use a straight edge when we're doing guidelines. And we basically, as soft as we possibly can, we draw in the outline of our cube so that it becomes very accurate, because I know some of you have a problem with freehanding, but we'll spend the whole semester freehanding. So here we go, very softly. And guidelines are just that. They're here so that we can trace them. So once we get our guidelines in and they look good, we can come back and with our chisel point, we can simply trace over the top of our lines that we've put in. So we're basically just tracing the guidelines we put in that were very, very light. Now, if we put in the guidelines light enough, we don't have anything to erase. Now, up at the top, this is what we call a multiple line. And this is another sketching technique that a lot of artists use. And I'm going to switch over to my other pencil now because I'm starting to get a little light. But basically what it means is we build an object by building up lines. So if we get one that's kind of off, we just correct it. But by adding more lines, we're getting more definition, and more lines. So we're just building up the lines as we go until we get it. So if you get a line in there that's not accurate, you just draw right over the top of it. And so we start to get a sense of what the object is by building up the thickness of the lines that we're creating. So by putting multiple lines. This technique is what we call a continuous line. And a continuous line is a little difficult. It's actually a drawing technique that comes from the book, Drawing from the Right Side of the Brain. But basically what you're going to do here, remember we lifted up our pencil in order to make our lines. Here we can't lift our pencils. So it's one continuous line without lifting up our pencils to create our cube. And if you need to go over it a couple times, you can. But that's a continuous line. A little bit more difficult to do. We have to kind of think about it. Our poor brain wants to draw the least amount of lines possible. But that's a continuous line. We don't lift our pencil off of the paper. Now, the last technique is what we call a punch line. A punch drawing technique. And basically that means that we're going to draw with fuzzy lines, a cube, a simple cube. And once we have it drawn, we're going to go back over just the perimeter lines. And we're going to press relatively hard so that we get this darker outline around it. Sometimes we have to draw multiple lines in there. But drawing around the perimeter makes that object come forward or punch off the page. Punch off the page. The last two areas down here are gradations. So you can use a guideline if you want to. And this is what we call a vertical gradation. And a vertical gradation is using fuzzy lines, but we're going to start by pushing relatively heavy and relatively white. And as we get further away, we're going to lighten up our stroke so that it becomes very, very light as we get out towards the edge. So there's this gradation. So it's not only darker for each line, and the lines start dark and they get lighter, but they also get thinner and the spaces in between get wider. And that gives us a sense of rolling or roundness. This one is actually a continuous gradation. And again, we want to work with a chisel point. So I'm going to switch back to my chisel point here. And we want to start off top left-hand corner, relatively dark. And then we want less pressure as we go down a nice continuous gradation. So do you see how I have a triangle up here and a triangle down here, a dark triangle here and a light triangle here? What we want to do, and you can go over this several times until you kind of get it to do a little bit better, but we want a continuous gradation. We don't want a sense of that line changing. We don't want to see a large triangle here and here. So go after it again, push a little harder to lighten it up so it's a nice, smooth, fuzzy gradation. Fuzzy gradation. So now, after you've practiced those lines, we're going to go to the exercise. And the exercise is going to be done, just follow the directions. You're going to watch the video, this particular video. You're going to print the line types and techniques worksheet and practice on that. Then in your sketchbook on page 2, you're going to fill up the entire page completely with line types. So the line types are the first 2 rows with these. So you're going to fill up the whole page. Then you're going to go to the second page and you're going to fill up all of them with the techniques. Now, when you're doing your sketchbook, and I have an example here. When you're doing your sketchbook, you want to draw on the front page. So that would be your page 2. And then you don't want to draw on the back side. You want to draw on the front side of the next sheet. That's because when the pages, when you're carrying it around, they rub against one another and they tend to smear a lot. So only draw front page, front page, front page, and leave the backs of those pages blank. If we run out of pages for whatever reason, then we can always reverse it and start drawing on the backside. So when I say a full page in your sketchbook, I want it filled. So you're going to practice your fuzzy lines, and you're going to practice your pressure, light, pressure, pressure, light, pressure, pressure, light, pressure. You're going to do your dashes in different places, but you're going to fill up this entire sheet. So it's important that this is just practice, but you want to fill the entire sheet of both types. Then on the next side is where you're going to do your gradations, and you're going to do your cubes with techniques, with drawing techniques. So that's your next assignment. Thank you.